Hello there. It's May 26th, 2025, Memorial Day. Thanks to all those who served and sacrificed. I wanted to do a walkthrough today of my hedgerow, my main hedgerow that runs north-south. I'm kind of at the very back southeast corner of my property now, looking toward the road. I normally walk from the other direction toward this direction, so changing it up a bit today. But this hedgerow, it's 800 or 900 feet long, and some of it, well, a lot of it was destroyed 5 years ago when the power company came through and redid these power lines. They expanded them, and they used to just be sort of simple wooden poles, and they made them much taller and bigger and a wider right-of-way. So that disrupted my site pretty well because I had a hedgerow planted underneath the power lines. And you'll see as we go down, there are some larger things that maybe did not get run over by heavy equipment, but most of the stuff did. And so it's 5 years in. I thought it'd be good to kind of do a snapshot of where things are at 5 years in. And the major limiting factor here is deer pressure, deer browse. So I'd say the new hedgerow doesn't officially start till about here because I wanted to leave a generous space near these power poles. There's a substation in the background. So this is a remnant of the old hedgerow. Hazelnuts used to come out to about here, and they're still kind of limping along, but the deer are really hitting them hard. So here's where we begin the 2020 replant of the hedgerow. And as we go down, you'll see the way this is planted. It's in a zigzag pattern. It alternates left and right, and the plants are spaced 4 feet linearly down the row, and then they're only about 2 or 3 feet apart in the zigzag. So basically you've got to plant every 2.5 to 3 feet or so. And the reason I did that heavier density of planting is because I knew that you're going to lose some plants. And I learned that I've learned that over time with this garden. So there's going to be some mortality. There's going to be some things that just are not happy. But mostly the species that I planted here were things that had done pretty well for me historically. So you'll see there's lots of hazelnut. I'd say hazelnut is probably at least a third to half of this hedgerow because it is done really well and it's a useful crop. So there's hazelnuts, nannyberry, Nanking cherry, native rose, serviceberry, I think that's M. lankier laevis, another nannyberry, hazelnut. There's a few autumn olives, and there's a few other things in the mix, 9 barks and red osier dogwoods, things like that. So it's kind of mostly made of those species, and they're all pretty much shrub species. The serviceberry will get a little bit taller, but I may maintain that for height so it doesn't get too close to the power lines. But the autumn olives do a good job of filling out quickly and also boosting the growth of other things. But you can see, so this nannyberry, this 9 bark, as we go along, you're going to see a lot of deer browse. And so I've been putting more brush and just kind of brushy stuff around, weaving it through this hedgerow, trying to make a little more of a physical barrier for the deer not to, come so close, and also just to give the plants a little bit of protection. So I dug up a bunch of bamboo rhizomes from my other place and kind of threw that stuff here recently. But it looks like deer don't like Nanking cherry that much, so that you'll see several of the Nanking cherries are on the larger side compared to most things. And at my site here, which is dry, sandy soil, we haven't had any really awful drought years in the last 5 years. We've had some drought, but nothing that was like record-setting. So yeah, the growth has been okay. I'd say that things that grew well grew about an average of a foot per year in every direction. Now things like autumn olive, you can probably at least double that. Autumn olive, is a very successful pioneer species, and it grows 2 or 3 times faster than everything else I plant it with. So I do have a few trees that have shown up, like this oak here. I have to get rid of these and cut those down. I'll do it when it's not oak wilt season. But there's a few, quaking aspen, there's eastern red cedar. I can yank that out. There's some sumacs, which aren't going to get too tall. You see I stuck bamboo here to kind of make a makeshift cage around things. This hazelnut probably did not get run down. I'll step farther away. So that's about 8 or 10 feet tall, these hazelnuts, and they fill out pretty well. But the newer ones that I planted, and you can see the weird growth habit of this 9-bark here. It's kind of empty in the middle, and it's just about to flower. These things, in a few days, these will be going off. There's a few that are just about showing white down the line here. But yeah, and I've also put in a few herbaceous perennials, like this is rosin weed down here, because that's almost like a shrub. So to fill in, but you can kind of see the density of planting here. But you know, some things have died and not everything has made it. So we've already got some gaps, but I think the planting density will accommodate for that. And especially when we get down here to the mature hedgerow that was planted in 2011, that has filled out quite a lot, and that was planted at 6 or 7 foot spacings, just a single row, and that is about 20 feet wide now. Look at these freaking deer. Okay, they just murdered this rosin weed there. So yeah, I probably will have to get some of that deer and rabbit repellent spray to spray things, because I can't realistically cage everything in this hedgerow. It's hundreds of plants, and I don't want to mess around with that much caging and that much time and money. So the deer repellent stuff does work pretty well. I've used it to keep deer off of my arborvitae in the wintertime, and it does a pretty good job. Maybe I have to reapply it once. But yeah, you can see pretty obvious signs of browsing, and they don't seem to bother autumn olive much unless you graft it with gumi, and then they seem to take an interest in it for some reason. So around these big power poles, I've sort of left a space, you know, 12 or 15 feet away from those, just so that I'm not getting in too close for comfort. Here again, autumn olive is doing great. Really good growth on that, whereas the nanny berries and other things are kind of struggling. Serviceberry's been browsed. Red Osier dogwood looks kind of sad. Hazelnut looks kind of sad. This is a different dogwood. That almost looks like, is that gray dogwood? I don't know if I planted that. That might have just shown up. There is some, like a colony of gray dogwood down the road. I planted it here once, but it didn't survive. Maybe it's some other dogwood. Here we go. Here's a early 9-bark flower, first of the season. Salute. So that 9-bark is probably a remnant from the last hedgerow from 2011 or 12, I think is when I planted this back here. Probably, yeah. But this part, this what I call the back 40 back here, didn't get as much attention and care as the stuff in the front, which is closer to the road and closer to the areas where I am all the time. So here, this autumn olive is actually, that's got to be 15 feet or more tall. I probably should cut that down and let it regrow, but that's great growth on that. And we've got wild hazelnuts in the background. Hazelnuts are something that occurs on this site naturally. Here's a couple of grafts I did of gumi onto little autumn olives that I planted, and those are growing okay, and I did cage them to keep them away from the deer. And speaking of blossoms, we've also got red osier dogwood starting to bloom. That's been blooming for a week or two. And here's a cherry tree I've got to get out of here. But these things, I've said this before, but they bloom kind of over a long period. They'll have flowers while they have mature fruits on them too, which is pretty cool. So yeah, this Nanking cherry looks a little sparse, but I don't think it's from deer browsing. This 9-bark looks like some of the lower branches are getting shaded out by the upper branches, so they're kind of dying off. But looks pretty good. Again, anything that's this big back here probably did not get mown over or run over by the bulldozers. So there's some areas here that you know, where things pulled through or were spared. But you can see hazelnuts, they grow, American hazelnut that is, they grow, you know, 100 or a few hundred stems per bush, and they fill out, they go wide. So as we get up to this mature part of the hedgerow from 2011, you'll see that it's about 20 feet thick, and that's just a single species hedgerow. So they were planted at, here's wild rose. Again, we got a lot of browsing here. They were planted at 6 or 7 foot spacings, and it's become 20 feet wide now. I paced it off again. The last time I paced it off, it was about 15 feet wide, but it just sort of keeps expanding out, especially the hazelnuts. They just seem to keep going and going as long as you will let them. And you'll see there's a few nitrogen fixers in here besides autumn olive, so that's autumn olive, but there's also false indigo, and I should plant more of those. This is rugosa rose. The deer seem to have a real taste for that also. Now the false indigos, they all got smoked a couple of weeks ago with the, oh, there's a beautiful oriole, maybe you can see orange. With the late frost we had a couple weeks ago. It's been 2.5 weeks, but they're just starting to regrow. Now, some of them are better than others, but these should be starting to flower right about now. The ones at my house, which did not get frosted, because that most places are not a frost pocket like this garden is. They're doing fine, and they've got flower fronds put out, and they're just about to open. So now we're getting into more of the classic hedgerow. These few things here were planted at that zigzag spacing, but this larger serviceberry is a remnant. And then most of this stuff for the next 100 or 200 feet is remnants of the 2011 hedgerow that's gotten quite wide. So here's a couple of mature American hazelnuts, I think, growing together there. There's a 9-bark, there's a lilac. Those have finished flowering. There's a little gumi I put down there. And then here we've got a hazelnut that got mowed down and it's regrown. And the serviceberry's kind of become the overstory here. And it's got a pretty good crop of fruit on it. You can see the kind of reddish color of the new growth. But yeah, serviceberry, there's sort of been a stratification here, if that's the right word, where the most tree-like species is the serviceberry or the European hazelnut, and everything else is pretty much shrubby. So now the serviceberries are pretty much out of my reach. I can't really get most of them. The birds get most of them, which is okay. But I may want to, let me kind of walk to the other side of this here. I may want to start taking down some of the thickest stems of the serviceberry every year and let them regrow, because I don't want them to get too high up into the wires. And you can see the trunks are getting to be a couple, 2 or 3 inches in diameter now after so many years. Probably, yeah, 2.25. And maybe you can or can't see, well, this has got some maybe deer rub damage from a few years ago, but sometimes the rabbits have gotten onto them pretty badly too, and done a lot of damage in the winter, but they recover. And the hazelnuts don't seem to be, other than the deer browsing, they seem to be pretty hard to kill. So I'm gonna walk back to the other side again. But yeah, you can kind of see if you look in here, there's like remnants of, you know, things buried and lost in here, and some trees that have popped up, and maybe poison ivy I've got to get dealt with. But yeah, it keeps growing. And then, you know, I had planted some herbaceous perennials on the margins of this hedgerow years ago, just kind of stuck them there temporarily, and the hedgerow has expanded to kind of swallow those things up. So now they're a few feet in, kind of buried in there. And I think I didn't show it. Where is it? This. It's hard to get my bearings when I'm on this side of the hedgerow, because now it's sort of like 2 different worlds. But I don't know if it was that or this. Maybe this. Okay, I think 2 years ago I cut this American hazelnut down to the ground totally and let it regrow. I wanted to sort of see, it was kind of a loser in terms of nut quality and production. So it's got some fairly straight-ish growth. Now the deer were hitting it when it was regrowing, but it seems to kind of outgrown them now. But that was just an experiment, which was interesting to see. I don't think American hazelnut is a great coppice species for making crafts out of. It probably doesn't grow quite like the European one does that people are used to using. I'm showing here another serviceberry with some trunk damage from a few years ago. And there's wild rose kind of tip rooting as it goes, working its way through the mix here. And another 9-bark looking really very pink on the verge of those flowers opening. So that'll be a bee festival once that opens. But yeah, here are some, you know, lilies and irises and things that some of them are actually like buried in there, but they're kind of getting swallowed up. You know, some of them are a few feet back in there. And then you can kind of see maybe there's a lot of excavation here. And yeah, I'm standing, it's got to be 8 or 10 feet away from where the little tree tube is there. with that serviceberry growing out of it. So the thing is really spread out. Now if I get in here, you see this excavation was probably a groundhog originally, and there's a hole there. And I thought it was going to kill all this stuff for sure, because they really just laid the soil bare and excavated under the roots. But I guess a lot of these things are pretty tough, and they didn't seem too fazed by it. And over the time, it's been fine. So nothing, no worse for the wear. Now the groundhog that dug that thing, something eventually came and ate it. I think I saw a massacre, some hints of a massacre one time, and something else might have occupied that hole. So it's cool that this hedgerow has become kind of wild enough and separate enough to give shelter to things that can use it as habitat. And this was just all grass when I got this place. Here's a European-ish. It's a hybrid, but it's got more of the European characteristics, hazelnut. And you can see it's got more of a vase-like form. It's got multiple trunks, but not 500 trunks like the American ones. And some of them are much bigger in diameter. So the American ones, I don't ever see those get much more than about an inch in diameter before they kind of die off. You won't find, or I haven't found in my growing them, any that are very substantially thick. But these, these definitely can get thicker, like a tree almost. So this, interesting here, this looks like it kind of escaped the frost a bit. So this false indigo is, just about to flower. Maybe it didn't get wasted. Although right next to it we have a button bush, which did get wasted by the frost. And that is just kind of starting to regrow some leaves. So now we're getting into a different section of hedgerow. From here to the road, this was all run over by bulldozers, and all this stuff in the front was pretty much replanted. And so this particular hedgerow here, these were spaced again in a single row, and I want to say they're like 5 feet apart. So it's a little tighter than the original hedgerow was, but not as tight as the one in the back, because I can give this a little bit more care. I've been planting a little more herbaceous perennials. I've stuck in some autumn olives kind of on the edges of it to boost everything else. And some of those I've grafted with gumi. That's what that is there, and you'll see some more. But again, real heavy browsing, poor red osier dogwood. The serviceberry got a cage last year, so it's hanging pretty tough, but this hazelnut is looking rough. Rosa Sharon is pretty late to leaf out. I put a few of those in here because they're kind of weedy, but they're just something to add to the mix. They're pretty harmless. And here I got a nice wild rose specimen. The deer are hitting this. You might see some leaf damage and some nipped off. It's weird they can eat thorny stuff like that, but I guess they've got pretty tough mouths. This 9-bark has really been taking a hit. Hazelnut, that's a grafted autumn olive, gumi onto autumn olive that I caged, because those are kind of precious. Again, the Nanking cherry doesn't look too bad. Autumn olive looks great. And that hazelnut looks like it's been mostly escaped the wrath. I've got some bramble here. I planted some kind of a raspberry in here. Rosa Sharon is just leafing out. Red osier dogwood, hazelnut with a autumn olive in front of it, another grafted autumn olive behind it. I finally caged that currant over there, and it's grown a little bit better since that cage has been on. And here I've got some herbaceous perennials in front of the hedgerow species, and they will eventually get swallowed. I have to maybe move them out, because again, the depth of this is, as we're looking at this, it's only 5 or 6 feet wide, except for the autumn olive, that's wider. But like I said, I'd say about a foot per year in every direction seems to be how things are growing at my site. If you've got better soil and give things better care, you might get double that. I don't know. So yeah, that's kind of the end of the hedgerow here by the road. And if you have things like cup plant, which is what this is, you could almost use that in a hedgerow, because it's related to the rosin weed I mentioned earlier, but it's also like a very large, strong looking, shrubby, herbaceous perennial. And the deer are eating the milkweed. God, they like to eat everything. So poor milkweed growing in the path, which is not a great place for it. But the deer are taking care of that for me. So I'm not going to walk through the whole place. I might do a longer video soon showing that in the next week or so, but kind of a lag time, not a lot of stuff flowering right at the moment. You can see some things trying to regrow after that frost, the mulberry, pawpaws, etc. So thanks for watching, and hopefully that was a little bit informative about hedgerow. Here's an open grown serviceberry planted 1 year before the ones in the hedgerow, but basically the same time. And you can see it's got a wider, more spreading form. I'm going to zoom out. And those trunks, yeah, they're 2.5 inches in diameter, and it's probably got a good 20 foot, 25 foot spread already, and it's about 15 feet tall. So yeah, you know, open grown things versus things planted in hedgerow, they will grow a little differently. But I hope everybody is doing well, and I will talk to you later. Thanks. Bye.